Hey guys, Robbie K back here, doing another Robbie's Ranting Reviews, coming at you with kind of a new swing tonight. Before we get to kind of my other pre-review that we're going to do, I wanted to take a moment and try something new based with my buddy Tim, who gave me the idea that maybe we could do something else outside of movies, since, as we talked about in my first video, we're not necessarily just about movies because I do like a lot of other stuff, though that will be my primary focus. Anyway, rambling aside, let's talk about kind of the new review that I wanted to do on a video game from E3. Now, for those who know about E3, you know it's the Electronic Entertainment Expo. And with it comes a lot of video games and a lot of new news to excite us, to get us ready for anywhere from the coming weeks to the next year or two, to bait us into spending all of our hard-earned dollars and cash on on the latest and greatest entertainment that will hopefully last us longer than one day. With it, there's a lot to cover, and depending on how this video is received and where I can go to improve on it, other videos will come on it within the next week to try to expand and arise from it. But of the ones I wanted to talk about, let's talk about the biggest one that's kind of been swarming the YouTube channels and live streams for about the last 2 days. And of course, it's from the kings of the video game industry themselves, Nintendo. And I use the kings very broadly because for some, they're the kings of it because of their history of reestablishing the video game world back in the 80s. Some who think that they can do no wrong, given the massive success they've had, and others who will probably say, no, they're not the kings because they have, of course, done some things that even I do agree probably aren't where in the best interest of the customer, more for the business, and kind of don't make any sense either. Outside of a couple of honorable things, well, I can't say honorable necessarily, but outside of wanting their work to be respected and not stuck on the shelves, which is what they talked about. Anyway, we're going to talk about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, the latest and, of course, biggest conversation topic that once it was revealed had the numerous feeds, apps, sites, and social media a buzz in essentially a war of comments on whether it was going to be good, bad, or perhaps luckily in between if you're one of those that kind of looks at the duality of conversation and argument. Now, before I kind of get into what I thought about the game itself, for those who don't quite know what I'm talking about, let's do a quick history. Super Smash, and of course, kind of a quick summary of what I liked and disliked about it as a whole. Super Smash Bros. Was the one of the first fighting games in the Nintendo lineup to combine worlds. While we've had other video games that preceded it, prior to, of course, the N64 arising, this one brought in all of your favorite Nintendo characters into a world and gave it kind of a unique the fighting genre, a unique twist that was surprisingly balanced, to an extent, of course, because we all know that there are things they did that kind of broke the balance. In addition, we're looking at characters who it balanced kind of everything and led to just this fun, engaging challenge because it wasn't just a direct punch-kick fight. It had a little more strategy to it and a little more creativity and fun behind it compared to what we had seen before. Now, the thing about the Super Smash Bros. Is it brought 12 characters in, and the likes of it is that it was something new, kind of brought a good powerhouse of Nintendo fighters to the mix, maybe given one or two who were not quite the powerhouses that they wanted to be, but again, the way they did it, it came out to be really fun and a new style to kind of adapt to. And with it, kind of like that Mario Party element from the N64 days of adding a mini-game twist to it to kind of give it a little variety to open up the potential. And of course, back in the day, and we'll go through this video way down the line, but it was a video game that was balanced to cater to the single player as well as the multiplayer. But just when you thought it couldn't get any better, Melee, the next one that came out for the GameCube, kind of took all avenues and improved upon them exponentially. Not only was the character roster expanded to include even more powerhouses and beloved favorites, but it kind of revitalized the Nintendo realm. Other Nintendo realms like Fire Emblem. You had a few other Pokemon who had kind of been lost to the winds, always famous, but never in this kind of light. And of course, Mr. Game & Watch, a classic blast of the past history for the Game Boy, came back in full color, well, full black and white color, that is, and essentially worked. In addition, you had the evolution by adding adventure mode and bringing with it kind of new challenges and, of course, the fun trophies that came with it as collectibles. It expanded upon what was already a great idea, and given the new stages that came into play, the new character dynamics, and a combat system that was further polished and fun, you had, again, another step in the right direction. Then came Brawl. You know, the one for the Wii that was trying to bridge the generation gap, and with it, you know, it's kind of where the series started reaching the grand divide of going to those who liked and those who disliked. For Brawl, you know, some of the character choices they brought in were starting to show a little bit of running out of ideas, because a lot of them were very similar playing styles, just with slight altercations to them. And what I mean by that is you can... Alterations, thank you. Sorry about that. Again, it was alterations, not altercations. But, you know, essentially... they were just like, for instance, Fox being kind of the fighter who came with it. Then you had Falco, who wasn't as fast as Fox in regards to blasters, but had a little more kick. And Wolf, who had probably the best power, but was the slowest of the bunch in terms of firing speed. You know, all similar playing styles, and when you had those final smashes, again, you kind of had, again, more of a carbon copy factor. So that's kind of where Brawl lost a lot of people, I think, in terms of that. I, for one, being a single player, love the story of the Subspace Emissary. Really think that one was a fun new way to kind of bring it together, crafting a story that not only helped you unlock characters in a different way if you weren't lucky enough to have a bunch of people to play multiplayer with for hours, but it just kind of expanded on the story that I personally enjoyed, despite it being a little simpler than I think others were expecting it to be. And then you have, you know, the combat. I know from my undergrad days, it was a very popular fighting tournament. So popular, in fact, that both it and Melee kind of got scratched to the point of not being able to be used. And that led to them having to order new copies and to kind of make up for it. Now, when it comes to the again, finesse of it, it had its moments. It had some good trophy components, but it didn't quite come off as well as I think Melee did. And when the mod for Melee came out, because a lot of people weren't the biggest fan of Brawl, you know, it was just one of those kind of lost to it. So then the Wii U and the 3DS versions came out, and with it, you know, it was another attempt. Now, again, we'll talk about video game consoles themselves later on down the line in a longer video, but you know, after suffering some of the sales components more on the Wii U side than the 3DS, Smash was a way to kind of bring it back. And what I liked about the Smash Brothers was, again, new characters that you didn't quite expect to show up. Wii Fit Trainer, the Villager, a couple of the Pokemon choices such as Greninja, so happy he was there, but again, surprise. Little Mac from the Punch-Out series, Rosalina, and then, of course, a couple of new styles that were essentially reskins and remakes, but, again, they fit very well in the universe. So across the board, it was great to be brought back in with it to essentially come up with what was a good revival for it. And the combat, again, got a nice finesse in terms of the 3DS. Now you had it portable. No longer dragging wires into controllers, batteries. You now had a 3DS component with an improved wireless capability connection, and that just gave you portable Smash, which, let's face it, everybody was really looking for. Now, the two exclusive versions were great because you had a little bit of each with them, but of course you wanted the same things in each version as well. In terms of single player, from the very little I got to play with it as I was in kind of exams when it came out in its prime, the single component of it was all right. I don't think it added quite as much as some of the other ones did. I did definitely miss the story component, as that was my favorite single player adventure. But it worked, especially with the evolution of the Master Hand getting a few evolutions to his form. So cool on that. But its main thing was bringing the 8-player matches to life, and I think that was kind of a revolutionary to many people, because now the what was supposed to be a 4-man frolic of fighting became essentially a mashup of 8 members going crazy with it, and the fields expanded. Everything about it just brought new energy, and as a lot of my friends who are big multiplayer said, the addition of the 8s kind of raised the stakes. Sometimes a little more chaotic depending on the stage you picked, whether it be Omega or regular form, but often an extra component in there that really amped the stakes up. The other thing that came with it was the amiibos, and I had mixed feelings about it. One, it's a brilliant marketing ploy by Nintendo to get you to buy more of their merchandise, but at the same time, the way that they did it was, well, if you don't want to take the system with you, or you don't have your DS but want to fight on a friend's, cool USB drive. Power up your characters to new levels, make them stronger. And that kind of isn't my idea of a Smash, because for the 3 versions before, the handicaps kind of help make up for training and getting you geared up. I can't tell you how much, because I'm not very good at the franchise as a whole, with given fighters are one of my weaker areas. But at the same time, it's just like it was kind of defeating the purpose, because Nintendo had already kind of balanced this. What was the point of leveling them up? At least in my eyes, it kind of, again, is, if you were going to do that for all the versions, I guess it would make sense. And of course, hindsight is 2020. But for me, leveling them up kind of didn't make sense when you already had a strong gameplay. Anyway, that's kind of the series review as a whole. We can dive into more of them. And of course, if you guys like this and want to leave content and feedback to kind of open my eyes, help me see it from new angles, that's always my goal, is to open up to as many angles as possible to deliver the best reviews. Now, let's get to the actual thing you're here for 12 minutes in. 12 and a half, sorry. And that is the new game itself, Ultimate. Now, reading the comments, looking at the posts, watching people's reactions, and even getting with a couple of my buddies, one of the first things that kind of comes to mind is Super Smash Bros. Ultimate a new game? Or is it just a port/reboot of kind of the most recent game? And the answer to that question is, at least in my opinion, mostly it's a new game. But I see where people are thinking it's a reboot, because for the most part, you're not getting as fresh a roster as you might have thought. If you look at kind of the renditions as we were leading up to it, depending on which gap you're crossing from first to second, a major expansion of fresh characters that each had a few tweakings to it. When you went to Brawl, you had a few trade-offs, but it was still refreshing to an extent. And then when you got to the new one, I was about half new and half old. But this one, you're expanding on it, and in terms of new characters, right now we're only seeing, I guess you can technically count 2, Ridley and Daisy, who were premiered. But at the same time, you're also getting some Echo characters, and you can technically, Daisy is the Echo character. I meant to say the Inkling. My apologies. You're getting Inkling and Ridley as our 2 new characters with potentially new styles, while Daisy is an Echo character, which, let's face it, we've been fighting with Daisy as the reskin of Peach for years, since Melee. But now we're getting a new style with a slight twist to what is essentially the same combat, but plays slightly different. Perhaps Dr. Mario will be the same way, and perhaps even Young Link will. I don't know. Depends on where their evolution styles go, and looking at some of the changes they've made, it looks like they're attempting to make each fighter as unique as possible. So what do I feel about all the roster coming back? Well, for one thing, I think it's actually a really cool idea. Why? Because a lot of these characters, up until DLC, and if you didn't want to pay for not one, not two, not three, but four, if not five downloadable contents, which are mostly more costumes for your Mii fighters than anything, you still haven't seen half of these guys since Melee, or even Brawl. And that was something that I think a lot of people were missing. As a result, by bringing all of them back together, we finally get these epic mashups and see how they evolved with the modern gaming tradition. I myself am excited that Pichu is back. He's not my favorite, mind you, but seeing the little cute guy and my friend Thomas used to really destroy with him, it's great to see that there are still some quirks that are, of course, annoying, but part of his character. To see the new age of gamers come in and potentially find new strategies that we couldn't even begin thinking about. In addition, we have with the new characters, new ways to mix and match. So again, we're getting this kind of new dynamic. Now, in terms of reboot, yeah, we're not getting the new rosters like we want, and at the moment, we're getting essentially um, three. If you want to count Dark Pit as kind of a new version of the Echo based on how it comes off, and maybe Lucina too. We're getting currently only two new characters. Now it's Nintendo. Are they really content on just keeping it to two? I don't think so. But here's something that we kind of have to keep in mind as well, is that by doing these old ones and bringing in the new ones, I myself would want to see a few new ones to kind of bring in the, that new adventure feel with it. So I always wanted to see seeing some things unleashed in there to help put those landmarks on it. Now, in regards to the Ultimate, though, something we always have to worry about is what happens when we start getting the character roster too big. Now, there are some, especially if you are a big fan of Japanese not RPG, but Japanese anime fighters, that there is no such thing as too many characters. After all, playing one of the more modern ones, you're getting up into almost 200s in characters, and many of them are either just skips to new forms, against like costume changes from a different universe, potential people who were mentioned, or maybe even unique characters depending on the game you're playing. And for them, there isn't such a thing as a cap for characters. However, given what I've seen many pro players do, a lot of characters are fun to try at the beginning, but then you start finding your probably four favorite staples to play with depending on tournaments. Again, it's great that they're kind of bringing this full roster back in, and I applaud them for, again, trying to make each of them unique. And if it's Nintendo and they do their homework, which the creators and developers almost always do to some extent, it's not as big of a worry as, say, some of the other things. However, depending on what their next step is, this kind of brings two things. Number one, are they going to be able to maintain the uniqueness of each fighter, or are we going to get a lot of rehashes and carbon copies like we've seen in the past with some of the other ones? Now, again, there are the Echo fighters, who are essentially, as I agree with some of the people on the not excited side, is that they're essentially just the same kind of character with slight speed adjustments and things like that. And kudos to that observation, because it is very much true. However, a slight speed thing really can change up a character. So again, I'm waiting to see within the next 6 months how they're going to finesse this and really perfect it to where they want to get to the levels. In regards to kind of fighting elements to it, you always worry about, though, when you get to those kind of characters, is it going to be too much as well? Again, 64 characters to choose from. Sounds like a great, noble idea, and in theory it is. I mean, if you guys have this fantastic 8-hour Smash Fest, you're going to have plenty of options to do it. But many professional gamers, unless kind of forced to go into new avenues, may not enjoy this, because their playing style is find your champions, go with it, and play to win when you get super competitive with it. In addition, something else is that, let's face it, Nintendo isn't done making systems anywhere close. And in addition, I don't think they're done with Smash games. Despite it being ultimate, this is definitely not the ultimate end. So where do they go from here? Is it going to become the new expectation that we have to have these major character rosters? Or are we going to be able to kind of step back and add new ones and delete others? I don't know. Back in the past, it kind of worked. And even though the new one came out and had downloadable content, you got to choose if you wanted to expand the roster. Will fans be happy with the shrinkage if they do that? Or will this become the new staple to where we build up to, again, like the animes, 120, 150 characters? Is that really good with Smash Brothers? In addition, what about downloadable content? Now that we have all these characters, are we going to, one, need downloadable content? Is that how we're going to get the rest of the new characters? Is it going to be worth it? That's something to also consider as well. Now, diehard purists who are absolutely biggest fans of Smash Brothers and going to play it until, of course, the next one comes out or something better, or maybe not, I can't say better, but flashier comes out. I don't know. But the purists will most likely want to go ahead and buy it because it's downloadable content for a character you've probably been dying to play with on this regime. However, for many of the other common players, or maybe not quite as competitive circuit on it, is downloadable characters really going to be the only new way to get it, and is it going to be worth it? I don't know. We'll talk more on DLC because there's been plenty of videos on that, but of course I'll be happy to share my opinions depending on how this goes. In regards to it, let's talk stages now. When it comes to Smash Brothers, we like to fight on these iconic stages, but the more I've gone back and reviewed, the more I've realized is that their stages maybe aren't as dynamic, at least in this go-around from what I've seen, than the others. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to various worlds. It means look at the layout of the stages. I'm not saying that fighters in general have the most creative, but they're bound into kind of a format of two-dimensional fighting, unless, of course, you go to three-dimensional fighters, as we've seen. But let's kind of stick to the classics that we talk about. A two-dimensional left, right, up, down fighting style to bridge it. And yeah, it's contained, but it's essentially what made the fighter genre as it is. When you look at Smash, though, Smash Brothers, the reason it sticks out as much is that it kind of broadened the horizons to fight. Yes, it's not necessarily 3D fighting, and even though it is three-dimensional kind of graphics and sprites, it's not coming at the Z-axis of it, the back and forward. With it, you kind of look into a lot of, you're expanding on it. You're going through these deadly horizons. You're adding a new stage difficulties and hazards into it to kind of mix up the combat. And when you look at the stages this time, at least the ones that they played, it's very flat to me. Now, it doesn't mean they don't have their hazards. I mean, looking at kind of the Pokemon arenas, we know that one is just chock full of deadly stage hazards in terms of the wild Pokemon that are out there ready to destroy, crush, and potentially explode and send you flying. But a lot of the places that they fight kind of remind me of Final Destination. And yes, looking at a lot of my friends, whether it was in undergrad or watching professional videos, I get it. Final Destination is very popular because it brings out the true element of Smash. Kick the crap out of each other with your favorite character, potentially play with items, so many of my friends preferred not to play with items, and just minimize the stage hazards and interference so that you can just get to work destroying each other. Cool. I totally respect that idea, but for me, one of the things I loved about Smash was those unique stages that added that twist element. Hyrule Castle and its various catacombs lead to you going to find items and potentially find new ways to maneuver. If you're using a lightweight character, those extra obstacles saved your butt from getting sent flying and potentially lead to, again, hazards. When you look at kind of Kratos' platform, yeah, it was a little annoying, especially in terms of some of the adventure mode missions, but man, could that thing really kind of change up the combat when he smacked the platform and changed the angle of it. You had essentially a lot of Samus Aran stages that added to it. A few more Pokemon that had 2 or 3 layers to it. And yes, the Splatoon stage that we saw has those layers to it. But from what I've seen, and hopefully this is just with the kind of testing with it, there'll be a little more dynamics into it and making those stages not just so two-dimensional fighting, but really expanding on it. And this kind of goes back to some of the melee stages I fought with, like the Donkey Kongs, or Brawl's Ice Climber, which, yeah, was kind of a limited one, but stacking meets fishes and the potential to jump across. I'm hoping for a little more dynamic in the finished project, especially with how long they've been kind of teasing us with it. So that's kind of where the stage aspect goes. In regards to the amiibos, this is a very quick one. I'm hoping they don't really capitalize on them. I don't think that the necessary leveling up was the most necessary decision. I can't say that it's going to ruin the game, other than the fact that we're now all going to be going out for the next wave of toys, hoping to find the one that's compatible with this one. And hopefully, if so, they'll allow you to replace your previous character with a in your switch in your device with the new one, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. But knowing what a lot of the game studios do, I can't necessarily count that they're going to make us get all new ones again to essentially allow you to save your character. Again, I haven't necessarily heard in the stuff or read more in depth into it, more to look at. These are just coming from the reviews in the tree box. The sandbox. The sandbox elements that we were seeing with the Nintendo Treehouse group. Anyway, what's the next thing I'm kind of looking for? Well, in all honesty, the next thing is making sure that it is balanced between single player and multiplayer. You will find that there are people who are one end of the spectrum or the other. And with that, you have, for me, I'm more of a single player. And something that I loved about Melee as well as Brawl, as I told you, is that there were components that were really appealing to me. With Melee, you had the adventure modes and the challenges that you had to do to try to collect all the trophies. Yes, trophies might be a little annoying, especially some of them with their ludicrous as well as extremely difficult, really time-consuming criteria to meet, especially in Brawl when they came out. But, the biggest thing is that you've got... you had those challenges that were fun and really appealing to me. Hopefully there will be a story mode. They asked that question during the interview at the first of the Nintendo Club's debuts, but we didn't get any information on that. And digging in a little further, we'll probably find some hints and see where they're going. I myself would love a story mode just because, again, I had fun with it. Maybe a little more challenging, but, at the same time, the challenges are... but the story mode would be fun. And if not, going back to kind of the Melee formula, making it worthwhile to play through the arcade mode 64 times, or playing through it enough to just have fun with it, and not just letting it kind of be a repeated mess that we see. Hopefully the icons and adventures and the collectibles will be worth it. In addition, I'm also hoping that there will be good multiplayer. Now, in regards to what made Smash Brothers so happy for me, was that I always loved getting together at friends' houses and having that kind of communal trash talking with of course playful banter, and just being with your friends as you fight with cartoon and Nintendo characters to your heart's gore. In regards to the 8-player, give or take, I think it's a great element. I myself was always a fan of the 4, but heck, if you add 8, maybe put some computer players in there, it's going to be fun. But one thing I worry about is that sorry about that, dog got in the trash. One of the things, though, is that I don't want it to be geared specifically more for multiplayer like I felt the last one was. Again, I understand, and I am totally hearing the players who say, it's a fighter. Fighters are meant to be multiplayer. Get over it. Yeah, I get it. But, part of the thing I love about fighters is when you have that good balance of it, which, the Super Smash Bros. Series used to have. The multiplayer aspect, especially online, is going to be great with the Switch's portability. You're pretty much getting the 3DS and the Wii U version kind of combined into it, which, again, is going to expand its horizons. But I don't want it to just be all geared towards that everything you're doing is just to expand on the multiplayer, or that if you don't do multiplayer, you're missing out. again, if you're like me, single player is kind of one of your preferred, and if you're lucky enough to find friends who get the game system and are happy to come in and play with it, and the game itself, great. I'll be more than up for it. But the other thing is that if you don't have the time to become a master in it, but it's all about multiplayer, then you kind of lose what's special about Smash, at least in my opinion. I unfortunately do not have a lot of time, seeing as I'm no longer in kind of the elementary, middle school, and high school levels, and have the summers to really get good and on weekends participate and continue to train. Unfortunately, the days of internet gaming and kind of video game career hadn't quite presented itself back when I was able to kind of hone my skills. So going up against professional players who can destroy me, yeah, I'm going to hear you guys right now. Yeah, get better. Yeah, if you can't run with the big dogs, then don't. Uh, Totally hearing you guys, but again, for Nintendo to put all this out and make this big dynamic game, you're gonna have to kind of have that balance for me. Anyway, in regards to anything else that I can kind of think about is that um, I guess that's about all I can really come up with for it. I'm hoping that this is going to meet a lot of expectations. I'm hoping for some refining. I guess the last thing that just crossed my mind, which I was trying to remember earlier, was how do I feel about kind of breaching out of the Generation 1 characters? Well, since Smash Brothers is all about bringing Nintendo characters to the arena and fighting to your heart's content, I guess technically they're still following their rules for the most part, with Bayonetta now kind of having its place in the Nintendo world. Street Fighter by far kind of having not only a lot of its home system origins in the Nintendo world, but also with the newest one, the complete Super Street Fighter Turbo Ultimate Edition, Smash, whatever you want to call it. It kind of makes sense there too, and of course more Fire Emblem characters. But I don't want to see them reaching out too much from the Nintendo things, because again, that's kind of what made Smash. Now, don't get me wrong. I love Final Fantasy, and seeing Cloud in there was cool. Added a new element, and yeah, they did their jobs well and gave justice to the character in his world. But we already had Dissidia for me. We have a couple of other fighters that brought it in. Not saying that they're the best fighters, but they have their own element. And if Nintendo starts kind of breaking the rules and extending it out, then you're kind of going into what Soul Calibur did. And I just don't think, for me, that fits as best into it. This is Nintendo's avenue, and I'll see what they do. And it'd be cool if they bring in some cool characters. But this is supposed to be the Nintendo Worlds Crossing, and if Nintendo ends up getting stakes in it, fine. But otherwise, stick to the mascots that you guys have and bring it into gear. So let's kind of wrap this up in terms of it. First of all, I'm definitely excited for the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Despite the monotone voice and the lisp with it, this is supposed to be kind of, like I said, an analytical component. I am totally stoked at the fact that we are getting a new Brawl game that seems to be back